everyone, Sean Healy, personal development educator and NLP trainer here, and you're watching another episode of the Sean Healy Relationship Resourcing Series. This particular episode is about negotiating for our relationship. I thought today I would talk a little bit about or borrow from the frameworks of Dr. Pat Allen, who's a child, family and marriage counsellor, transactional analyst, and amongst other things, I think one of the most influential contributors to modern relationships. And I would thoroughly encourage anyone to have a look at her relationship material. She's written a number of books and has a podcast series. I'll probably mention those a little bit later on. But I thought I'd borrow some of her frameworks to help us in today's episode. So, what are we sort of kind of talking about here? Setting boundaries, limits, and expectations in relationships at the best of times can be anxiety provoking. We're a little bit worried about putting forward what we want or what we don't want towards our partner and how are they going to receive it. If we grew up in family systems where anytime we spoke up directly for what we want, we were in some way shamed, punished, or squashed for that. So these can be, and of course, you know, if we're worried that if we apply too much pressure and demand to our partner, then perhaps they'll think better of being with us and up and leave. So I think anything that makes it easier to have challenging conversations in relationship is massively helpful. So Dr. Pat Allen talks about 4 key areas of negotiation within relationship. And that is, we need to negotiate time, we need to negotiate space, money, and play. And I'll talk a little bit about and expand on those categories a little bit as we kind of go. But I think if we think about being in business, business requires certain parameters to let us know we're going well or not. There are certain expectations, limits. When we join a business, we acquiesce to the business with the idea that if the business does well, we will do well too. And as a result of that, we agree to play by team rules and play our role in the team and support the team. And if that's done well, then we get supported too. And part of that is we have regular check-ins and meetings about certain areas. We don't let anything just kind of meander and hope that it works out okay. And I think we need to take some of those principles into modern relationship. A little bit of structure actually adds to more freedom in relationship. A little bit more planning actually adds to more intimacy and passion. There's sometimes an idea that if we just let things organically develop, they'll be fine. And I think with the demands of modern relationship, how many relationships aren't going the distance, and even those people who stay together, not everybody's happy, then we need to use every tool at our disposal to do everything we can to have a stable, loving, erotic, joyful relationship with another human being. So in this episode, we're looking at effectively how do we negotiate on behalf of the relationship. So here's the relationship umbrella under which 2 people agree to come together. And then if we're negotiating on behalf of the relationship and that's done well, then both people benefit. Where we get into trouble is if I negotiate only on my behalf without any respect for your thinking or any acknowledgement of your feelings about things, or vice versa. We're going to have trouble if we're operating for a self only in a after making a choice to be in a team-based framework, which is what effectively relationships are. So if I'm making sacrifice, I'm doing that willingly for the relationship. I'm doing that for the betterment of the relationship. If I'm taking on responsibility, if I'm being loving and cherishing, then I'm doing that for the sake of the relationship. And if I'm focused on the health of the relationship, then ideally both myself and my partner will be well looked after and supported by that particular focus. So if we move our way back to these four fundamental areas to be addressed, probably the one I'll talk about most today, time effectively. That's where I want to put my focus. But I will just do a brief summary of each of the four areas so that you have a sense of what those are. Time is basically, obviously, how we spend our time, whether that's alone time, couple time, or time that the couple spends with others other than themselves. Space has to do with our kind of our physical environment around us, and with more and more people starting relationships, second and third significant life relationships later in life, then we're likely to potentially, I've got my house, you've got yours. How are we going to work out living arrangements? Who's going to do, how we're going to segue the chores? All that kind of thing relates to space. Money, of course, my money, your money, and our money, and how we're going to make that work. And then play, both sexual and non-sexual. How do we make the most of our playtime? So these are key areas to kind of talk about. And we'd rather put ourselves into a potentially minor, uncomfortable experience of having potentially slightly challenging conversations before they're absolutely needed, because otherwise we're going to face a lot more anxiety if these areas go wrong and we're trying to recover rather than we've already got something in place. It's a lot harder to work backwards and try to set boundaries and renegotiate limits and things like that when we're highly stressed, highly angry, and things haven't been going well for a long time. So best possible chance is to get out in front of those things and have these negotiations when we don't need to. And hopefully we don't have to visit them too often, because just by putting these structures in place, our relationship hopefully should move smoother, and we're both very clear on the guidelines that we've both collectively chosen to participate in. But let's look at the idea of time in this particular episode, negotiating time. So depending on kind of your personality and who you are, how much alone time do you need? Sometimes that's not much in the initial kind of honeymoon phase. We can't get enough of each other. We time comes very, very easily in the early stages when we're awash in chemistry and infatuation. But later, as we kind of settle in and the relationship starts to progress, then how much I time do I expect, and how much I time do you expect? Because some of us need a bit more downtime and time away from people to recharge and regather and recollect ourselves than other people do. So negotiating what that might look like going forward, and ideally as soon as possible, rather than we start to notice, 3 nights a week my partner disappears for hours and I don't know if I signed up for this, rather than, I'm fairly aware of what I'm signing up for, and that's okay by me. When we negotiate we time, as a couple, how much time do we spend together? Do you have slightly different expectations of that to me? My idea of couples is that they, for the most part, live in each other's pocket and spend all their time together, whereas your idea of couple time is, 3 or 4 nights a week we spend together, and then the rest of the time we spend either on our own or as a couple with others. So these are important things to have some idea of going into a relationship and continuing to be able to revisit the agreements that we've made. And then, of course, we've got to negotiate around time with other people. So as a couple, that means, how much time are we devoting to our children? How much time are we devoting to our friends? Perhaps we grew up in different family systems where the expectation of closeness and time together is very, very different. I grew up in an environment where every Sunday I went to even as an adult, I went to my parents for Sunday lunch, whereas for you, a month or two could pass before spending any, gathering together with the family, and that was okay. So knowing what that is likely to be, because again, sometimes if we're getting external pressure from work colleagues, friends and family about how much we never see you. Hey, what's going on? Well, we can present a united front around that because we know, well, these are the agreements that we've made. Lovely to spend time with you, but right now, this is what we've agreed upon. So that it helps us to be quite, continue to move in a united way. And as I say, we're talking about and negotiating time on when we're in our best space. We're making an appointment to sit down and go, hey, this Thursday night, why don't we have a meeting and start talking about it and negotiating how we're going to spend our time going forward as we continue to grow and build our relationship, how we're going to do this in a way that really helps us to have the best possible relationship as a couple that we can. And where are we likely to make compromises? Because it might take a bit of time in some areas to get to a mutually agreed upon framework there. It's important to recognise that given the way modern relationships are going, however you work that structure is entirely up to you. We can look at what other couples are doing and possibly borrow a little bit from that, but I think the idea of the normal relationship or quote standard relationship is evaporating so quickly that really it's about, well, what works for us? What is, what are we willing to happily acquiesce and work out and commit to on behalf of the relationship. So whatever you work out for you is whatever you work out for you. And of course, if that might take a little bit of time to get that working. You might need to agree upon a couple of trial periods. Here's what we think might work. Let's try this for 3 months and check back in. And again, even though we've negotiated these expectations around time and what that might look like, then also we have to be prepared to revisit that, talk openly about how that's going, what about that's working, what about that isn't working. Given what's going on in our external life, do we need to temporarily modify what we're doing? Because sometimes external pressures for a little bit of time take up more of the time than we would like. So at the moment, we've got this going on. Let's just spend 2 weeks getting that particular crisis sorted out, and then we'll get back to what we're kind of doing. And then we're looking at the way we're doing this. Does this promote our sense of closeness? Or do we need to tweak it a bit further? Like originally, we'd planned in our couple time that we would commit to every Thursday night was date night. And we've been doing that now for 2 months. How are we feeling about this? Are we feeling like we're continuing to keep our connection and our intimacy going? Or perhaps we need to add in a bit more. And again, how structured you want to make that depends on the couple. If you're a couple that loves structure, then okay, schedule it in and write it in the calendar. But even if you're a couple that doesn't love too much structure and prefers spontaneity, some framework will actually promote that spontaneity, not take away from it, because it's just so easy for us to forget or get distracted or reprioritize. So let's have these conversations early. Let's get some expectation around time and how it's best spent for the best benefit of the relationship. So I hope this episode gives you some things to talk about. If you've been watching other ones of the Sean Healy Relationship Resourcing Series, thank you so much. Hope you found this particular episode useful. By all means, if you want to check me out on my podcast series, Sean Healy Tools, that's available on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and also at the website emergestraining.com.au. If there's anything you want me to do episodes on this, such as these kinds of elements around negotiating and things that link to boundaries in relationship, if I feel I can contribute something, more than happy to do so. And as I promised, I just wanted to acknowledge someone who I think is doing some really wonderful work in the field of navigating modern relationships and the pressures that we find ourselves under as we as you know, the frontier of relationships very rapidly evolves, moves, and changes. And that, of course, is I really do love and highly recommend the work of Dr. Pat Allen. She's got some amazing books out. Getting to I Do, um, Staying Married and Loving It. It's a Man's World and a Woman's Universe, and there are a number of other great books that she's written or co-written. And then, of course, her podcast series, Dr. Pat Allen, is a great podcast series, so check that out too. Wonderful work, and like I said, I think part of this for me is about, you know, putting forward and promoting the ideas of people that I think are really contributing to better quality human relationships going forward. So check her out, see if she's for you, and of course, as I say, hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope to see you with us on another one. But for now, bye.